It's now the third week of October. Things are looking good. Things are looking bad. Really, it all depends, and I hate saying that particular phrase, it all depends, because it leads me into not being able to tell you very specific information as far as trail cameras and hunting, and I hate saying that. I like to characterize this week as variable. There's just a lot of variables going on right now that are very confusing for deer hunters, and all this confusion and the frustration and what appears to be slow movement during this third week gives rise to the October lull. Now we are in the third week of October, which means, and get ready for this because it's a pretty long list, the crops are still standing and they're about to come down. Crops are currently being harvested around you, or all the crops have been harvested around your property. The acorns, they could still be plentiful. They could be non-existent like they were before, or they could just be getting finished up and deer are starting to move to other food sources. The habitat is changing. Leaves are falling off of trees. A lot of the grass and forbs growing in the woods is starting to lay over, which means a lot of the bedding areas are starting to disappear, and deer are going to have to move to different habitats and different bedding areas. There's a lot going on with the weather. There's a lot of cold fronts that have moved through already during October, and a lot still to come. But a lot of the days can still be labeled warm for deer hunting. We are also approaching November, and as we progress through October, deer movement is going to be always increasing, especially during daylight. There's going to always be more and more movement as we approach the rut. And the last variable, but certainly not least, is hunting pressure. Whether or not you hunt your property smart, you don't hunt it a lot, you just wait for those cold fronts to move through. Hunting pressure, especially if there's a lot of hunting pressure on your property, can affect deer a lot, and it can affect their movements across your property. So there's a lot of variables going on, and that might have seemed like a long list, but it actually turns out to be the definition of what is perceived as the October lull. So during this time, during the third week of October, what I like to do is just take a step back from hunting, take a step back from my property, and look at it, reevaluate it with a set of fresh eyes. And I like to pull all the cards across all the different properties I'm hunting, or the property that I am hunting. Chances are I might not have checked camera cards for a very long time, maybe even the first 2 weeks of October, because I was so busy hunting or just trying to stay out of those areas where I thought there would be deer movement. And that actually reveals a lot of information. But while I'm pulling cards, I'm also going to be looking around, scouting, looking at where the crops are, if they're harvested, what's going on in the surrounding properties and the surrounding crop fields, taking a look at acorns again, taking a look at just foot traffic in general, taking a look at the habitat as the leaves are falling, as grass is starting to lay down, as the forbs in the woods are starting to lay down, and see where the bedding areas might be potentially moving according to food sources. There's a lot of intel that can be gathered by scouting and pulling cards. Now, I actually just got done doing that very thing. I just got done pulling cards across several different properties, several different trail cameras spread out across the properties in very different locations. Some in transition areas between bedding areas and larger food sources. At the time, still beans that were green and standing corn that had not been harvested yet. Some in oak flats like we talked about last week, or in prominent features around the oak flats that catch deer movement. And the others in food plots, particularly clover plot that was coming on strong, and brassica and oak plots. And this card pull revealed a lot of very valuable information, especially since I scouted and came at the property with fresh eyes while I was pulling cards. Now, with this recent card pull information and the scouting information, plus what we already know should be going on with the third week and fourth week of October, it paints a pretty clear picture of where we should be hunting and where we should be putting our trail cameras to catch the deer movement that is occurring. Now, on this particular property, we've actually covered this property all the way back into week 1. But the large soybean field, the staple food source on this property, it's turned yellow, it's dried up, and it's not attractive to deer anymore. Last week we covered one of our hitless bucks, Leroy, working a mock scrape in the transition area that we were focusing on between bedding area and that soybean field. Pulled cards today on that same trail camera in that transition area, and we have one of our hitless bucks, Dub Deuce, working that exact same mock scrape, basically the same video, just Dub Deuce, not Leroy. But that date on that particular video was 9:30, just a couple of days after we had Leroy, when those beans were still attractive. But ever since they have turned, they haven't been attractive, and we really haven't had any hitless bucks moving through that transition area. Actually, deer movement in general has been pretty slow in that transition area. Also, to add to that, the 100-acre cornfield that was right next to the soybean field has been harvested, and we actually got in and hunted when that cornfield was harvested, and we really didn't see a whole lot of deer movement, not as much as what we thought, again because those beans had turned. Now all the other corn that is surrounding the property, which is there's actually quite a bit, is still standing. So what we actually think is going on, especially based off of our other trail camera intel, we had one of our trail cameras in the very back of the property, a lot closer to the standing corn, and actually a lot closer to pretty big oak flat with a lot of white oaks and red oaks, captured both Leroy and Dub Deuce working through that side of the property. So what we think's going on is, since the soybean field has turned, it's not attractive anymore, and since the security cover of the corn on the front of the property, especially with the main road in this area across the front of the property, we think that security cover plus that main food source, they've just kind of drawn back into more secure cover and more towards that standing corn and towards those acorns. So going forward, what we're thinking is that the main bedding area has moved further back into the property, again further back into more secure cover in that standing corn. So the tactic this week will probably be to move trail cameras further back into that area and start hunting that area for those bucks further back on the property, and not focusing so much on the front of the property. Our very first tactic, week 1, was mock scrapes, and if there was ever a time period or a week in October where we would rely upon the intel that a trail camera over a mock scrape gave us, it would be right now. Before the pre-rut, what we would label as the pre-rut, when the intensity and the action really starts heating up right before the rut, early does, they start becoming receptive, and bucks really start worrying about catching those very first does. Again, the action really starts to heat up. Before that happens, scrapes become very, very promising. A lot of bucks will continually check scrapes, and if there's ever again a time to rely upon the intel and maybe hunt around scrapes, it would be now. So as we now get into the 3rd week of October, and you start hearing that term October lull being passed around between hunters, just remember all those variables, all those questions that need answering. What's going on with your crops, the acorns, your food plots? What's going on with the hunting pressure on your property or the surrounding properties? Is the weather still what we would call warm deer hunting days? When's the cold fronts coming through? Are you hunting those cold fronts? It's just too easy to throw the term October lull on slow deer movement. Rather, find out where they are moving, find out what's going on in your property, and create your own success.